A pop idol wears a scandalous dress at a red carpet event and instantly becomes the talk on social media. A portion of her fans express their disgust and disappointment, while others applaud her fierceness and sense of authenticity. Soon after, very familiar but opposing discourses emerge. One side insists that she is yet another victim of the over-sexualization, objectification of girls and women perpetuated by the media, while the other side finds her to be inspirational, fearless for owning her sexuality without giving a thus a sign of empowerment to be sure. If you've been around trans girls or trans communities, this kind of dichotomy should be very familiar to you, especially around the topic of trans adult content. On one hand, some profess that it perpetuates the fetishization of trans women and creates unrealistic expectations, while on the other hand, trans adult content creators can benefit from it as a source of financial support, a form of self-acceptance, or as an outlet for their erotic expression. So which is it? Is trans porn harmful to us or not? To answer this question, we must take a closer look at what trans adult content creation means in 2024 and going forward. In the last decade, there has been a huge shift in the adult content creation industry. No longer are the porn companies the main players in trans adult content creation, but rather the trans models themselves have become it. With sites such as OF, Pornhub, or Clips for Sale, trans people have been able to skip the porn companies acting as a middle person and do it all themselves, starring in, shooting, editing, collaborating, promoting, and essentially creating their own adult content, portraying themselves any way they want and leaning into their sex appeal. Therefore, it's safe to say that most of the things that you see in trans porn these days is perpetuated by us.
The call is coming from inside the house.
We are increasingly becoming the ones behind the wheel, a fact that most criticism of contemporary trans porn tries to sidestep. At its original meaning, fetishization is the process of taking something that is inherently not thought of as being sexual into something extremely sexual. Take foot fetish as an example. Taking feet, which otherwise would not be thought of as sexual, into something extraordinarily sexual for those who have foot fetish. This, of course, is not the meaning invoked when some talk about the fetishization of trans women, as that would imply that trans people are inherently not supposed to be thought of as sexual. That is obviously not the case here. Rather, what is being inferred by fetishization is having a preoccupation with trans eroticism, to the point of it guiding one's default interaction with us. While there might be some merits to this point, I've seen the term fetishization be recklessly thrown around more often than not, doing more damage than good. I'll break it down for you in a bit, but before I get there, it's important to acknowledge that if you do hear this phrase used by a trans person, you should take it as an honest indicator of their personal boundaries and not necessarily a criticism of your attraction to trans bodies or trans eroticism, even if it comes across that way. It is often their way of letting you know, sometimes preemptively, how they don't want to be approached or treated. Perhaps they've had one too many bad apples approach them in sexually intrusive ways. We all get them from time to time. Or maybe they're just not open to sexual advances or ones from your specific gender or type. Or whatever it be. The point is you don't know, so best not to dwell on it. For every trans person who might not be into you, there are ones who might be. Now let's get to the phrase itself, fetishization of trans women. As mentioned earlier, we live in an era where trans people have become the primary makers of trans porn, which makes the fetishization criticism cut both ways, not only passing judgment on those who enjoy trans porn, but also entangling the trans people that make them. I've even heard of arguments of how trans adult content creators don't know any better, and they are also victims of the same process. Please, Since the majority of the fetishization criticism comes from a portion of trans people, it unnecessarily creates a judgmental divide amongst us. I have trans friends who are content creators, partygoers, and fashionistas, often on the more sexually adventurous side. And I also have friends who are deep thinkers, LGBTQ activists, and academics, often less inclined to be as sexually expressive. This, of course, is a false dichotomy.
The false dichotomy.
But perspectives such as the fetishization discourse sure makes it feel like there's supposed to be a separation of states between the sexual ones and the cerebral ones.
Bupkis.
The fetishization criticism also tends to build more shame and guilt for desiring trans bodies or trans eroticism in a world where most already struggle being public about it. How does that do anyone any good? At its best, it gets people to turtle up their desire for us, repressing it back down. At worst, it creates discord, frustration, and defensive antagonism. I've seen it happen many times. There's no question that trans porn has an effect in shaping society's perception of us. I think for the better, as it opens the gateway for many to discover that they have attraction towards us, and more importantly, empower certain trans eggs by viscerally demonstrating the extent of our sexual desirability. Sadly, the more heady perspective tends to favor a pessimistic outlook, neglecting just how liberating trans porn can be for many. Yes, there's always bound to be bad apples.
People who step up to us like disrespectful dweebs.
They need to be dealt with
Individually.
That is, if we even grant them the time of day. I, for one, refuse to allow rotten apples to spoil my perception of the whole bunch, nor pass judgmental generalizations on how sexually or non-sexually people, especially trans people, ought to express themselves. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more, like and subscribe. I am Lilith Laklur, and these have been some of my musings.